Today we're learning Eruvin Daf Lamed Zayin. We're going to start at we're going to go back and review a little bit from yesterday to get back into the topic. And we're going to start to pick up from where we left off with Brera. Today our whole topic is going to be about Brera. And then we'll finish to the next Mishnah and we'll end the topic of Brera today. Today's daf is sponsored by Ellen Galeb and Stephen Sass in honor of the bar mitzvah of their eldest grandson, Levi Moshe Weinograd, on Shabbat Nitzavim Vayelech. Levi, Bubby, and Zadie love you so much. We offer 2 words of wisdom to Kula Bo. Ellen and Steve are also celebrating the Brit Milah of their newest grandchild, Leo Galeb Sass, named for Ellen's beloved father, Leo Galeb, Aryeh Leib ben Eliyahu Zichrono Levracha. May Leo grow to love the Jewish people as his great-grandfather did, and may become a Talmid Chacham. Today's daf is also sponsored by Michelle Weiner for Refuah Shlema for her daughter, Bella Rachel Bat Malka Enya. You keep handling every challenge as they come and manage to smile every day. As I learn each day's daf, I do so with the hope that my and so many other women's learning will help bring about a Refuah Shlema for you. And also our learning should be for Refuah Shlema for Netanel Ilam ben Shenet Tzipora. Okay, we're going to start now. I'll just quickly review. We had this Mishnah where a person stipulates about his Eruv that he wants to decide, okay, there's a few different options, but he says, if someone's going to come from this side, I want to the west, I'm going to go to the east, right, to kind of run away from them. If they're going to come, right, then to other people, let's say the Chacham, again, there were different versions. Is he running away from the non-Jews, or is he running toward the non-Jews, and is he running away from the Chacham, or is he running toward the Chacham? And he can basically say, right, if I'm putting my Eruv on both sides, and later I'm going to determine which way I want to go, okay? Then we said, right, and even if he leaves it totally open and says, Lakan or Lakan, right, I'm putting on both sides, I'll decide tomorrow. Then, right, there's, let's say, 2 people coming to town. I'm not sure which one I want to go here for their drasha. Then he can decide the next day. And also we brought it, right, and Rabbi Yehuda said that it depends if it's, let's say, 2 rabbis. If it's his own rabbi, it's going to be obvious he's going there and only in that direction, versus if they were both rabbis, then he can decide. Now, according to this, and according to what we learned about Brera means that we can later decide, we can be indecisive all we want, we can later decide, and that will be that it's as if it was determined when Shabbat started, which Eruv was my Eruv. Okay, just an aside, I bumped into someone from the shiur yesterday, and we were talking about this whole idea of Kinyan Shvita, right? What's happening here is we're learning, according to this, you can be Koneh Shvita, you can determine this is my place for Shabbat, even without having real intent, right? You didn't have intent until later into Shabbat, which one you wanted to work, and that still works. So we were talking about the concept of Kinyan Shvita, and we were talking about the news and how there's going to be a Seger in Israel for Rosh Hashanah, and she was saying that she wants to go to, they were planning to go to Yerushalayim. Do you think she could still go? So I said, the rules are that you can only go if you plan to stay there for 2 weeks. I said, so she said, oh, it's just like Kinyan Shvita, right? We're basically saying, oh, I'm going to say that's where I'm living for right now. And then I can be here for the whole Seger, right? What's the big difference? The big difference is that there, you have to actually physically be there. You can't symbolically say, oh, this is symbolically my home, and therefore I can go and forth as I please, right? It's the opposite. So you have to actually physically be there. But then you can say, this is my home for the Seger, and I'm going to be here, and that's where I'm going to be. Whereas in Eruvin, you don't even have to do that. You can basically say, I'm putting down food, and now we're learning not only can you put down food, you can put down food in a number of places and say, I'm going to decide tomorrow which one I want to be. Well, that's a crazy concept, right? It's so removed. And then we're going to see that, according to this is where we ended, that we brought this bright of Io, okay, from the house of Io. Okay, Io, by the way, I looked up, and also thank you, Art, I saw you also looked up. Io only appears one time this is it. This is his one cameo appearance in the Gemara, and we don't know much about him. In fact, I saw Art had looked it up, and he wrote me that he was a Palestinian scholar. Where I looked up, it says Babylonian scholar. So anyway, at least I believe that's what I saw when I looked it up. But we don't know very much about him at all. But he appears here, and he's very significant in the sugya because he basically says the version of our Mishnah seems to imply that according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can decide on Shabbat. And that seems to go against what Rabbi Yehuda says elsewhere. Number one, what Rabbi Yehuda says in the Braita's version that Io has, where basically he says, Ein adam matnei shnei dvarim ke'echad, no can do. You can't just be indecisive about it. You have to say from the beginning, this is where I want to go. Or even if you don't know where you want to go, but if it's dependent, that's where we ended yesterday. He does say that it works. If the Chacham is going to come from the east, then you can say your Eruv works to the east, even though when Shabbat starts, you don't know that, but the facts are already on the ground. You just don't know them. So there we're going to say it's not like I'm deciding tomorrow. It's already decided and somebody knows. I just don't know which one, where I'm going to go. But it is decided, okay? There's actually a whole debate in the Rishonim because Tosfot brings up that there's other sugyas where Rabbi Yehuda does seem to say yesh breira, and then and Gefed is all about this week. If you can listen to Gefed and your Hebrew's good, you should listen. It's a whole interesting diyun about Gefet's whole idea is to go more in depth, whereas we're going more superficial learning, or not in the negative way, but right, we're trying to cover a lot of ground. Their shiur is more in depth and trying to understand this whole concept of breira. And there's a distinction between, and one of the distinctions she makes there, the Tosfot makes there that she discusses, is there's a distinction between, am I being indecisive, okay? Or am I saying my decision is going to depend on what you decide? If I say my decision is going to depend on what you decide, which in some other sugya Rabbi Yehuda says works, that's different because there I'm actually deciding. I'm deciding not to decide, right? I'm deciding that you're going to decide for me. And then there's a debate there. Is that considered indecisive or not, right? Theoretically, you could say that's not indecisive. It's just saying, I'm deciding to depend it on you. And then it's not dependent on me anymore. It's a little bit like the Chacham is coming. I just don't know where he is. So there's a bunch of different approaches to how to understand the different sugyot. Anyway, it's again, this is a very significant sugya in Shas. It comes up a number of times, and the idea behind it is very interesting. I'm going to kind of learn through the sugya, but I always think while we're learning it about the concept behind it, which is how much, right, does the decision need to be made, right? This is a good time in our lives. We're living both during these crazy times and in the month of Elul, time for tshuva, introspection, thinking, right, deciding we're going to do things, sort of about the idea of decisiveness over indecisiveness, right? We're struggling with this certainly in Israel with the indecisiveness of the government and changing the rules every 2 minutes. And right, it's very hard to function with indecisiveness. And when it comes to halacha, can indecisiveness count, right? We always talk all the time about kavanah, your intent, your intentions, right? There's like tshuva, same thing, right? If you don't have intent to do tshuva, you could do the technical motions, but if you don't have intent and you really mean to change, well, it's useless, right? You could say sorry to someone, but sorry doesn't mean anything if you haven't made a real decision to make a change. Anyway, a lot of thoughts about this. In any case, we're going to learn through the sugya now. So the Gemara suggested, and we'll just review this last line, 3 lines from the bottom. Adrabah, why are we rejecting the version of our Mishnah based on what Ayo says? Why don't we do the reverse? Why don't we say, why don't we say, let's reject Ayo because of our Mishnah? The Mishnah always has more strength to it. It's always considered the best source. So they say, Lo sakadatach tashim le Rabbi Yehuda deleit le breira. We have a tradition that Rabbi Yehuda, or we know from some other source, we'll see right now where, that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold by breira. Titnan, as it says in the Mishnah, and it's a little tricky, it doesn't actually say it in the Mishnah, it says part of this in the Mishnah, but Rabbi Yehuda's opinion doesn't appear in the Mishnah, it only appears in the Tosefta. This is really a quote from the Tosefta. Halokech yayin mi bein kutim. I buy wine from kutim. Okay, there's a debate about what this case is. Is the case kutim are the Shomernim? They are known to keep certain halachot, not others. They're not so careful about trumot and maslot, about tithing the produce. So now, I buy this wine from them. So I have to take trumot and maslot. The problem is, either it's Shabbat, and that's my main problem, or the problem is that I only have, let's say I'm on the way, I only have 1 jug. And I can't separate wine, take out some, right, I can drink and leave some in it, but I can't put some aside for trumot and maslot, okay? Or it's Shabbat, and I can't put aside because it's Shabbat. So according to the Tanakama, or which we'll see is Rabbi Meir, Omer, he says the following statement, and this can work, and then he can drink the wine. Shnei login shani ati lafrish. The assumption is there's 100 log. So 2 log, which is 1/50th. Here we're going to see truma in action, okay? So 1/50th will be 2 log out of the 100. Shani atid lahafrish. That in the future I will separate. Okay, he's basically designating in a symbolic way. Okay, and we'll see what he does. Harei hein truma. That will be my truma gedola. Asara, it's really not asara, it should be 9.8, because at this point he's left with 98 log, and he needs to take a tenth of that, but we already know the Gemara is not careful about decimals and things like that. So 9.8, he says, Ma'aser Rishon. Tisha, we're now left with 88, so now it should be 8.8, he takes Ma'aser Sheni, because it's another tenth. So again, they say 9, they round it. Tisha, Ma'aser Sheni, Umechal, okay, there's a number of ways to read this word. We'll just put it as one of the interpretations. Mechal means he redeems it onto a coin. Lechalel prutaz, he redeems it onto a coin. The Maaser Sheni, Vishote miyad. Okay, and he designates a coin that's going to be for his Maaser Sheni. And then he can drink at this point. Divrei Rabbi Meir. How does this work? You drink, you leave over that amount. Okay, so we had the 2 log, then the 9, then the 10, and then the 9. So he leaves over that amount of log of wine. And then, right, so you could drink the rest of it, leave over that, and in the end say, you see, from the beginning, whatever was left, that must have been my truma. This is radical because the wine is obviously mixing around every time he drinks. It's not like we designated them and put them aside. It's saying that in the end, whatever's left it'll be kind of predetermined that retroactively, that was your truma, okay? Even though it clearly wasn't, right? Because he couldn't have put any physically aside, and yet it works. That's because of Breira. That's how Breira works. It says that now when I have this and this is my truma, it's clear that before that it wasn't. Otherwise, he couldn't possibly be able to drink the wine because the wine is mixed up with truma. You can't drink truma or safek truma, right? There's no way to drink it. So basically, Rabbi Meir holds Breira works. But here comes Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Oslim. They forbid it. They say this doesn't work. Can't do Breira. So that's exactly why we want to go with Ayo, because Ayo's version against our Mishnah holds that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold by Breira. Since Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold by Breira, that matches the Rabbi Yehuda and the Tosefta and makes sense, reject our Mishnah. Ula, however, has a different approach. Ula amar leita la'ayo mimatnitin. We reject Ayo's version because of our Mishnah. So now, obviously, we're going to say ve'elahad katani Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon oslim. So what are you going to do with that? So we have, and this is, I know when you probably started learning Gemara, you said, why is there no punctuation? And it causes lots of confusion because there's no punctuation. Here's a great example where no punctuation causes serious confusion. Because he says, zuze, zuze, or zuge, zuge, either which way, it's the same thing. It means pair by pair, katane. The Mishnah, the Tosefta is in pairs, meaning it's not Rabbi Meir on one side, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Yossi on the other. It's Rabbi Meir, Divrei Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda. You have to change 2 things. You have to move the comma or the period to after Rabbi Yehuda instead of after Rabbi Meir, and you have to move the vav from before, right? It wasn't Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Yossi. It was Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, which a vav is a very small thing and very easy to move around because it's kind of like an insignificant, I mean, it's very significant, but it's kind of viewed as sort of insignificant letter. So he says, basically, the Mishnah should read, Divrei Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, period, meaning, according to Ula, Rabbi Yehuda is on the side of Yesh Breira, it works. And then Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon, they're the ones who are Oslim. What we're going to now see throughout today, the structure is going to be, first we're going to question Rabbi Yossi. Does Rabbi Yossi really hold Ein Breira, just like we did with Rabbi Yehuda, where we brought different sources? Likewise, here we're going to bring different sources about Rabbi Yossi, try to resolve them. And then we're going to have another aside, which is going to lead to another source about Rabbi Shimon, where then we're going to say, oh, Rabbi Shimon also seems to say Yesh Breira. So how are we going to determine these contradictory sources? How are we going to deal with them? So now they're going to say, V'sava Rabbi Yossi Ein Breira, v'hatnan. Rabbi Yossi, doesn't it say in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Shtei nashim shelakhu et kinehem. Anyone who learned Masechet Kinim on the last round, the last cycle, will understand this Mishnah. Otherwise, we'll explain it to everybody. Shtei nashim shelakhu et kinehem be'eruv. O shenanu kinehem lekohen. Ezehu sheyirtzeh. Kohen yakriv ola, ule'eze sheyirtzeh yakriv chatat. Okay, we need some background before I explain all this. Azav, okay, it could be a man. Most of kinim is said in the feminine because the majority of the pairs of birds that were brought were women who were bringing them. Who brings them? Azav, azava, ayoledet. Okay, these people bring a pair of birds. One is la'olah, one is l'chatat. We talked about this the other day. One's a sin offering, one's a burnt offering. And what they generally did was the women would bring money. Okay, there's two ways you could do it. The women could bring birds to the Beit HaMikdash and say, I want you to sacrifice these, or they could bring money and put it in the kuppah. We saw that was designed a little like a shofar shape. They call them shofarot, and they would put the money in, and the kohanim would take the money and spend it. So now, generally, I was thinking like, you put a little baggie with your money, and it says your name, and great, then they know it's yours. But according to the Mishnah, two women could bring their kinim together, meaning they could either bring a set of money together without saying, this is mine, this is hers, or they could also bring, if they wanted, 4 birds and give them to the kohanim without specifying which one's the chatat, which one's the olah, which one's for Rachel, which one's for Leah. Okay, so they could do that. Oh, okay, so either they brought their kinim together, or they gave their kinim to the kohen. It's either they bought them together, or they gave the money to the kohen. He can determine, okay, which one's olah, which one's chatat. This is again using breira. Why? And notice who says this, Rabbi Yossi. Because what it means is when we brought our money, we put it together. When he determines I'm using this money to buy that pair for that woman, and this one for the sin offering, and that one for the burnt offering, it's ki'ilu, right? That this was my money that was, and that was your money. Even though all the money was together, still we view it as if we kind of separated, and that only works because of breira. So how do we deal with this? So Amaraba, hatam kishihitnu. It's only if the women stipulated, we don't care what money you use for what, and then it's like it doesn't matter then. They basically say, oh yeah, we didn't specify which was which, and we're all together and it's fine. And that resolves the issue. But the Gemara says, well, it's obvious if they stipulated that it would work. So that's not relevant. So they answer a different answer. Kidder Rav Chisda. The Amar Rav Chisda, ein hakinim mitparshot ela, I b'lekicha ba'alim, I b'asiyat kohen. This is something we saw in Zvachim, where which one is a chatat and which one is an olah, and which one is which, becomes determined. There's 2 possible ways. Either when, and this is all based on the drasha on the verse there, either when the woman purchases it, she can purchase it and say, oh, I'm purchasing these 2 birds. She can designate it at that moment and say, this one is the burnt offering, this one is the sin offering. That's one possibility. But if she doesn't do that, and that's why what we're going to say is, hatam b'sheitznu, it's kind of like Rabba said, but it's not that they actually have to stipulate. Every single case, if the women don't stipulate, then who gets to do it? Iba asiyat kohen. When the kohen does the sacrifice, that's the moment now that the women can either determine when they purchase it, and if not, then the kohen has the rights, and he's the one who determines which one goes for the sin offering, and which one goes for the burnt offering, and likewise, which one goes for which woman. So therefore, this has nothing to do with breira, because it doesn't need to be predetermined. This is a case where the kohen has the rights to basically be the one to determine which is which. And that's why we said the women would just leave their money and the kohen would do all the purchasing and all the deciding. So therefore, that's what it's teaching us. And therefore, that's what Rabbi Yossi is saying. That basically the kohen has the rights to determine which one goes for which. Has nothing to do with breira because it doesn't need to be determined beforehand. So we reject this contradiction. It's not a contradiction at all. But that's not sufficient. Akate, Sava Rabbi Yossi, Ein Breira, but still it seems like Rabbi Yossi holds Ein Breira. Why? Vahatanya, it says in a Braita, Ama'aret Shamar lechaver. Okay, I'm already prefacing this by saying there's at least 3 different interpretations of this source that I saw. I'm going to go with one interpretation. So again, if you happen to see your commentary says something different, it's just a different option of how to read it. Okay, I'll do some background. We learned about Ama'aretz and Chaver, right? So Ama'aretz and Chaver, the Ama'aretz, we assume, doesn't take Trumot and Masrot. Therefore, the rabbis instituted that if I purchase something and I sell it to an Ama'aretz, I purchase produce, or any produce I have, maybe it's my own, and I sell it to an Ama'aretz, because I'm concerned that an Ama'aretz is not going to take Trumot and Masrot, I have to take the Trumot and Masrot myself. Okay, I have to tithe the produce before I give it or sell it to the Ama'aretz. So, what happened in this case? Ama'aretz sha'amar lechaver, kach li aguda achat shel yerek, o gluska achat. Okay, so something similar happened to me yesterday. We're trying not to go to a million stores. So I asked my sister-in-law, you going to a particular store before Rosh Hashanah? She said, no, unlikely. I said, okay, fine. I'll go there myself at some point. Anyway, she called me yesterday afternoon. She said, I'm going. So I said, great. Can you buy me the following thing? Okay, let's just assume it was apples. Okay. So I say, can you pick up some apples for me? So she said, sure, no problem. She buys me apples. So I go and I pick up the apples and I give her money for, right, what she did. Now, how do we view that transaction? Okay, there's two ways we could view the transaction. Either she bought, okay, let's say I asked for 5 apples and she bought 10 apples, okay? So she bought some for herself and some for me. Now, at this point, what happens? She gives me 5 apples. Now, was it predetermined which apples were going to be mine and which were going to be hers? Unlikely, right? Unless she's very picky and she picked out the nicer ones and took for herself and left me with the bad ones, right? But otherwise, we're going to assume she picked out 10 average apples, or maybe the reverse. She wants to give me the nicer ones. But either which way, basically the assumption is it wasn't determined from the beginning which apples were going to me and which apples were going to her. So when she gives them to me, it's going to depend. Does she have, let's say, okay, now let's assume she's a chavera. She's careful about Trumot Masrot, and I'm an Aretz. I'm not very careful about these things. So if we view this as a purchase, that I'm basically, okay, there's 2 ways we can view this. When I go give her money, am I basically, I sent her to be my messenger, right? That's probably how we would have viewed this. I sent her to be my messenger. So when she bought the apples, she bought them for me, even though, right, she was kind of being my messenger, even though it wasn't clear which 5 apples were going to me. Or do we view it as she bought them all for herself, theoretically, and she's selling me 5 of them now. When I give her money, I'm basically purchasing from her. She purchased them and I'm purchasing from her. If it's a sale, then what happens? She is basically selling to me. She, according to the law, has to take Trumot Masrot because she's not allowed to sell to an Aretz without taking the Trumot Masrot. But if we view her as just my messenger, and even though we didn't know which apples were whose, it's as if we knew whose apples were whose, and therefore she only has to take Truma on her own and doesn't need to on mine, then we would say yesh breira. Follow? So that's what we're going to read right now. Ama'aret shamar lechaver. Okay, that's me. I asked my sister-in-law, kach li aguda achat shel yerek o gluska achat, right? Buy me a bundle or one item. Eino tzarich la'aser. You don't have to take Trumot Masrot according to this. Divrei Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says she doesn't have to take Trumot Masrot. Why? Because we don't view it as a sale. We view it as she was my messenger. And even though you could say, well, maybe, right? And as you'd have to say, well, then when she gives me my 5, it turns out she never owned those. If she owned them, she'd have to take Trumot Masrot. She never really owned them, even though they were all together and she hadn't determined at the beginning. So it's when she gives me my 5, it becomes clear that those 5 were hers and only those are chayav in Trumot Masrot, and I get my 5. So clearly, Rabbi Yossi holds yesh breira. The chachamim omrim tzarich la'aser. And the rabbis say, no, you have to take Trumot Masrot because they view it as a sale. So, or the truth is, you could probably say, I'm trying to think, they say ein breira, okay? And therefore, it's not clear whose were whose, and then you would have to fix them. So what do they answer? Ipuch. Flip the 2 shitot and just say, you must have it wrong. Rabbi Yossi must be the one who holds tzarich la'aser, and Chachamim say no. And that's how we resolve the contradiction with Rabbi Yossi, right? It's a very easy fix, although you have to just remember the rabbis only do this when they're stuck and they have no choice. But they basically say, yeah, well, from the Tosefta, he holds ein breira. From here, he holds yesh breira. It must be a mistake, and flip the shitot. Tashma. But now there's another source of Rabbi Yossi. Haomer ma'aser sheyesh li bebeti mechulal al sela shetaleh biyadi min hakis. You say, the maaser that I have in my house is going to be redeemed onto whatever coin. In other words, you have your maaser sheni, which you're supposed to bring to Jerusalem. You don't want to carry it, so you're going to redeem it onto a coin. Usually, you take a coin and you say, it's going on this coin. But instead of doing that, I don't know, you're lazy, whatever reason, you say, I'm going to eat this produce right now. So I'm going to separate my maaser sheni. I already have my maaser sheni. I want to eat it. So what am I going to do? I'm going to say, the maaser sheni that I have is going to be redeemed on whichever coin I take out of my pocket next. Okay, so the next time I go into my pocket, or keys isn't really pocket, it's my money bag. The next time I go into my money bag and I take out a coin, that's going to be the coin that the maaser is redeemed on, and I can eat that food right now because it's already moved onto the coin. Now, what's interesting is what coin is it moved onto? I have a whole bag right now. I don't have a specific coin. So again, what do we say? When I eventually pull out that coin, it will be determined from before. I will go retroactive and say that coin was the Maaser Sheni one. Again, this is something that's not, we have no idea which coin I'm going to take. So according to this, Rabbi Yossi Omer Mechulal, he says this works. Okay, now, how can it work? Okay, it doesn't make sense that it would work because basically it's using brera, and Rabbi Yossi holds ein brera. So again, what do we say? Ipuch, switch it around, okay? Meaning, Rabbi Yossi said, Eino mechulal. Ema say that Rabbi Yossi Omer, lo chilel. It doesn't work, okay? So now, the Gemara asks a good question. We now had Rabbi Yossi in the Tosefta who said, ein brera. We had two sources that said Rabbi Yossi holds yesh brera. And what did we do? We said, switch those two sources and say that Rabbi Yossi really holds the opposite of what it says he holds. So the Gemara says, wait, it's 2 verses 1 here. It doesn't make so much sense. Why did you switch the version in 2 sources to match that one source? Why don't you say, you should switch one source for the 2. That would make more sense, right? Why say there's a mistake in 2 places? Say there's a mistake in 1 place. So they say, because this second source is clearly wrong, and we'll show you from the inside. Havadai ipcha. The source about the Maaser Sheni is clearly the wrong nusach because it says, Tanya, vadai ipcha Tanya. Certainly this Braita was said opposite. De katane seifa, because the next part of the Braita says the following. Umodeh Rabbi Yossi. Modeh means he agrees with the other position. Be'omer, that if he said, Maaser sheyesh li b'toch beiti, there's only one word difference here, okay? If you say the Maaser that I have in my house, Yehem mechulal al sela chadasha. Here's the only difference in the word. On a new sela, shetaleh biyadim akis, that I will take out of my money bag. Shechilel. He agrees that in that case it will work. So before we even understand what he's talking about, because it doesn't really make any sense why that one word should change anything. We'll get to that in a minute. But first, they're just going to say structurally, this proves that what? Midika amar hacha shechilel. There it says he agrees in this case that it works, which means Michlal dehatam lo chilel, right? Which implies that if he's agreeing with them that it works in this case, it means in the first case it didn't work. So therefore, it makes sense to actually switch that, right? That must be the wrong version. Okay. So now the Gemara wants to know, Hi Sela Chadasha Hechidami. What is this Sela Chadasha and why does it work? It doesn't really make much sense just because it's a new Sela. So Idi Katarte Tlat to Yesh Brera Hanu Kamaita. If you say he's got a few new slaim in his bag, right, in his money bag, well, then you would be saying yesh brera, and that's exactly like the first case. Doesn't make any sense. Ela deleka elachada. There must have been only one new coin, and what he's saying is, I want it to go on the new coin that's in my money bag, and he happens to have only one, and therefore it works. So then they say, but my ta'aleh, but then that doesn't match the words. The words say sela chadasha, that I will take out of the bag, meaning that whichever one comes up, it sounds like. So they say, oh, don't worry about the wording there. I did tani reisha taleh, tani nami seifa taleh. They just wanted to make the first line and the second line be the same. It's a literary thing. It doesn't really mean that it just meant when I take it out of my bag, that's when it'll be. But it was clear you were doing it on that specific coin. There was only one coin. Otherwise, this doesn't make any sense. Okay, next. Now we're going to have, so we dealt with, right, we started with Rabbi Yehuda and we said we're going to go with Ayo versus Ulu says we're not going to go with Ayo, and then debate about what does Rabbi Yehuda hold? Does he hold Ein Brera or Yesh Brera, 2 different versions? Then we brought Rabbi Yossi who says Ein Brera. We brought some contradictory sources. We resolved them all. Now, Amalei Rava Rav Nachman, before we get to Rabbi Shimon that I promised we get to, we're going to get to Rabbi Shimon through this question. Rava asked Rav Nachman the following question. Amalei Rava Rav Nachman. Man hai Tana da afilu b'derabbanan leit lebrera. Who's the Tana who holds? Now, until now, we haven't discussed derabbanan d'oraita. He's going to say that, now, let's think about it. If we're going to say you need intent and brera doesn't work, right? So maybe that's only true for something on a Torah level, because Torah level items, you need intent. It needs to be determined in a good way. but maybe you would hold, there's a thinking that maybe you would think that when it comes to rabbinic laws, maybe we'd be more lenient and we'd say, oh, even though Brera doesn't work for Doraita, maybe Brera would work for Rabbanans. So now, Rav is asking Rav Nachman, who's the Tana who holds that it doesn't work not for Rabbanans and not for Doraitas, okay? Not even for Rabbanans. Now, how do we know that there's a Tana who holds this? And we're going to move to Eruvin, because Eruv Tchumen, we already learned, is Rabbanan. Again, there's a machloket, but we're going to assume right now Rabbanan. Titania, Amar Lachamisha, if I say to 5 of you, Hareini ma'arev al eze mikem she'ertzeh, I'm making an Eruv here, and it's going to apply to one of you or a few of you. I'm going to determine it later. I'll let you know if it applies to you. Ratziti yelech, lo ratziti lo yelech. So if I decide, it's an interesting theory here, right? I can decide for you where you're Kona Shvita. So I can decide it's going to work for you, okay? But if I don't decide it's going to be for you, then it's not going to work for you. So I could do this apparently. So ratzami ba'od yom, eruvo eruv. I assume you'd have to agree that you're interested in it, but I didn't look into this enough. But the basic idea here is, if I did it and I determined and I said, okay, it's going to go to Amy and Adina, it's going to work for you on Shabbat. So then, eruvo eruv, then it works. Misha chashecha, but if I determined after Shabbat already started, and then I said, oh, I'm deciding it's going to be for Adina and Amy now, ein eruvo eruv. That can't work. So there you see, ein brera, because I have to decide before Shabbat according to this. I can't wait till after Shabbat and say, oh, well, that was what I meant. So Rav Nachman, what's his response? Who's the Tana who holds this way? Ishtik v'lo amar le v'lo midi. He was silent and he didn't say anything. He didn't know the answer. So now we're going to have a few problems with the fact that Rav Nachman didn't know the answer to this. So first they say, v'le male Tana debe ayohu. Why don't we say this is from the house of Ayo, which sounds, by the way, sounds like he had a yeshiva because it says Tana debe Ayo, right? So why don't you say Tana debe Ayohu? In other words, that's Ayo, right? Where he says, ein brera for Eruvin, right? That's it, Derabanan. So they say, lo shmi ale. Okay, now lo shmi ale could be he never heard of Ayo, or he heard it, but he didn't agree with it, like Ula, right? Ula didn't like his version. So it could be, we could say that. Rav Yosef has a different response. He says, Tanai shakalt me'alma? Did you forget a basic Tanaitic disagreement? In other words, here's the machloket Tanaim, and I'll show you. It's Rabbi Shimon. Okay, so let's see. Ditanya, hareini ma'arev l'shabbatot shel kol hashana. Another case. I'm making an eruv for, okay, you stand, it's a good time of year, beginning of the year, you say, I'm going to make an eruv for all the Shabbatot of the year. Ratziti elech, lo ratziti lo elech. But I'll determine each Shabbat if I want to rely on the eruv or not. So again, ratzami ba'od yom, if I decide before every week, do I want this to be my eruv or not? So eruvo eruv. But misha chashecha, if I don't decide before Shabbat and I only decide once Shabbat starts, Rabbi Shimon omer eruvo eruv, v'chachamim omrim ein eruvo eruv. What do you see here? Rabbi Shimon says it works. Yesh brera. Ding 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 ding. There's our problem. Going to contradict Rabbi Shimon that we saw in the Tosefta, that Rabbi Shimon was on the side of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. But right now, that's not why we're bringing this. We're bringing this to show, why did Rav Nachman not know which was the Tana? Here we have it explicitly. Rabbi Shimon holds yesh brera, and chachamim omrim ein eruvo eruv. So you have the rabbis here that say ein eruvo eruv, or you could even say that maybe it even goes further, which is v'hashaminan le Rabbi Shimon deleit le brera, kasha de Rabbi Shimon under Rabbi Shimon. But wait, doesn't Rabbi Shimon say ein brera? And what did they say? Ella, we can already guess they're going to say this, ipuch, flip it. And now it becomes that Rabbi Shimon's the one who says ein brera, even in Derabanans. And there you have your answer that Rav Nachman could have answered. And Rabbi Yosef says, I don't know why you didn't answer this because it's quite obvious. Okay. But now that we get to Rabbi Shimon, so now we're going to talk about this contradiction of Rabbi Shimon. So the first answer we gave to the contradiction was, flip the shitot, and Rabbi Shimon really says, ein eruvo eruv. It doesn't work because of brera. But now we're going to have two other answers. So now they say, my kasha. Why are you even raising this as a contradiction in Rabbi Shimon? You could look at Rabbi Shimon says this works for Eruvin, and then you'd say, but brera doesn't work for Truma, which was our original case where we saw Rabbi Shimon. Why? We have a very easy explanation for that. Why don't we say, Ki leitle Rabbi Shimon breira b'doraita, aval b'dorabanan itle. What happened? Rabbi Yosef says it's a machloket tanaim, and it's clearly Rabbi Shimon who holds in breira because it matches Rabbi Shimon in the other place. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. But Rabbi Yosef didn't have to say that. He could have said that Rabbi Shimon holds breira, ein breira, on a deoraita level when it comes to truma, but on a derabanan level of tchumin, eruv tchumin, he would say it works. So maybe that's the resolution, and you don't have to start switching the opinions. So what's the answer? You'd have to say, Kasava Rav Yosef, mandi itle breira, lo shna b'doraita, lo shna b'derabanan itle. Umanda leitle breira, lo shna b'derabanan, b'doraita, lo shna b'derabanan leitle. You'd have to say, the Rav Yosef didn't say that, and he said you have to, again, flipping the shitot is always the last resort. So they're basically saying you had a better answer. You could have said, Doraita, Dorabanan. Must be Rabbi Yosef says, we don't make that distinction, in which case we're going to say that, and that answer is exactly how we started, which is who's the Tana who holds, it doesn't matter, Doraita, Dorabanan, ein breira. Again, according to Rabbi Yosef, that's Rabbi Shimon. Okay, and again, you have to switch the shitot. Now we're going to have two other resolutions to the contradiction with Rabbi Shimon. So the first resolution we had was, it's really not Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon really says the opposite. The next answer is Rava Amal, Shane Hatam. Again, we're going to have to say Truma is different. Normally, Rabbi Shimon holds like Tchumin, Yesh Breira. Okay, the Eruv works. We're not flipping the shitot now. We're going to say by Eruvin he thinks it works, but by Truma he doesn't. Okay, we're going to have two different reasons why by Truma would be different. And it's not a classic case of Breira here. It's not, by the way, if you notice, it never said the words Yesh Breira, Ein Breira in that Tosefta. It just said either it's allowed to do this or you're not allowed to do this. So the ones who said not allowed, we assume it meant Breira. Now we're going to suggest maybe it's for a different reason entirely. And it's only unique to Truma. Rav Amar, Shanehatam debi'inan reshit, sheshayareha nikarim. By Truma, it says, Reshit degancha tiroshcha v'yitzarecha, Reshit gesonecha titen lo. Supposed to give the first. Now, when you say first, there has to be a second, right? And it has to be as distinguishable first. So you need shiareha, the remainder, right? You don't say it's my first child when you don't have a second child. So you say first when there's someone else. So therefore, you say, without having a remainder, you can't call this truma. So in this case, there's no remainder because it's all together in one thing. And that's why it doesn't work, because you need the remainder to be noticeable, okay, in order to call it first. So you can't call this truma if you haven't distinguished it from the rest. So now we're going to have an aside. Amarle Abaye. Abaye says, according to this, Alameata, then you would say, let's say you have two pomegranates and you haven't taken truma to maschot. V'amar, and you say the following statement. Okay, this is just arbitrary. If it rains today, then I'm going to take pomegranate number 1. That will be truma, and pomegranate 2 will be the one I eat. And if it doesn't rain today, then pomegranate 2 is going to be my truma, and pomegranate 1 is going to be the one I eat. So hachanami, bein yerdu, bein lo yerdu, to aim b'dvarav klum. Are you going to say that this doesn't work? Because again, what's the problem here? You don't have a remainder that's noticeable because it's not distinguishable. It could be either or. And if you want to say maybe, yeah, in other words, Abai is saying, you're going to say this doesn't work. Abai clearly seems to think it does work. And they're going to say, and if you say maybe, oh yeah, that doesn't work either, according to your logic, well, there's going to be a problem because it says in the Mishnah, V'hatznan, Trumat hakri hazeh, asrotav b'tocho, Trumat maaser zeh b'tocho. If you say, look at this pile, okay, you look at the pile and you say, the truma and the maslot are in the midst of this pile, and I'm going to eat. Okay, now what you seem to mean here is, it's in the middle of the pile, and then you want to eat the stuff on the sides, okay, without separating it. This works. So what do you see here? You don't need shiareha nikarim, because here it works. You have this pile. So why are you saying with wine it doesn't work, but here it does work? So the Gemara answers, no, I have an answer for you. Okay? Oh, and by the way, I didn't read the end. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kara Hashem. Rabbi Shimon says this works to do truma like this. So what are the answers? Shanehatam diika svivav. There you have the middle and the outside, and the fruits are all separated, or whatever it is. If it's grains, there's piles in the middle, there's piles on the outside. Those are distinct from each other. So even though you don't know exactly where to draw the line, you know at some point there's a line, and at some point you know there's some remainder that's clearly not truma. But in the wine case, all the wine is mixed up at all times. There's absolutely nothing distinguishable, and that's why truma won't work. So now we all of a sudden have a new answer there. We thought all along it's a brera issue. Now we're learning no, it's an issue of shiur anikarim. And therefore you can't call it truma, which means if you can't call it truma, you can't drink the rest of it because it's all what we call tevel, which is untithed produce. A third answer for the contradiction of Rabbi Shimon. Now we're going to see there's a different reason why they didn't allow it in the truma case. And now you wonder why they didn't bring this up at the beginning. But the end of that Tosefta has a conversation between Rabbi Meir and the other rabbis. And it says, why don't you just say it's the reason it says explicitly in the source? The rabbi said to Rabbi Meir, it's very nice, Rabbi Meir, you want to say that this works. They said, okay, now this is your classic worrier, okay, right? You have to worry about, there's people who worry about all possibilities, what might possibly happen. They say, there's a small chance you're going to drink this wine. You're going to leave over the rest in your jug. But it's possible that your jug might break. If your jug cracks, what's going to happen? All your wine's going to spill out. And in the end, you'll have no truma. And in the end, it turns out, right, your whole idea of the retroactive, this retroactive mafresh trumot maschot is not going to work. So why aren't you worried about this? I see Ruth wrote it's a leather flask, but I guess a leather flask also could tear. Okay, so in any case, why are you worried that maybe this will break and you'll end up with, right? No, you'll end up having retroactively, right? This is like how much you have to worry about outside possibilities. So what's great to see is his reaction. Amar lehen, lichashi baka. I'll deal with that if it happens. Okay, I'm not worried about it. I'm not a worrier like you guys are. Not an issue. So now they say, wait a minute. Go back to answer number 2, contradiction of Rabbi Shimon. And right now what they're saying is Rabbi Shimon was worried maybe it'll crack or break. That's what he was worried about. Not brera, not shiur anikarim. Okay? So now they say, wait a minute. According to Rava's reading that the whole issue is shiur anikarim, well, here it says explicitly in the Tosefta that that's not the issue. The issue is maybe it'll crack. So how does Rava read that source? So they say, hachi kamrele. This is what they said to him. Lididan, to us, our opinion is bi'inan shiur anikarim. Truma has to be taken in a way that it's obvious. But lididach, to you, who you don't agree with us about that, iyatamodeh, but don't you at least, are you worried about this other possibility? Shema yibaka hanov v'nimsa shotet tvalim lemafreya, and then amar lahem lechashi yibaka. So 3 possible answers to Rabbi Shimon, just to review the contradictory sources. Either Rabbi Shimon holds we switch the other, right? The source that was contradictory, we switch, or we say the truma is unique, either because it needs shiur anikarim, or because we're worried that maybe the flask will break. And and then it's only truma, and then it turns out everything we've been saying about Rabbi Yehuda saying ein brera, maybe that's not even the case. Okay, so this raises a lot of questions to everything we learned previously. Okay, that's it for today. Have a great day.